Hey, everybody. Welcome back. If you're a returning watcher to the Vectra AI podcast. Usually is where we sit down members of the Vectra product team and just talk candidly about stuff we're learning, seeing, working on, etc. But today I'm flying solo on this one. Over the course of the last couple weeks, maybe last month or so, I was fortunate enough to attend um, the Cybersecurity Summit series in Seattle and Chicago and New York, and we delivered a presentation on how AI unlocks the value of existing SOC talent, as you can see on the screen. Um, and thought that instead of in addition to presenting at those shows, kind of walking through what we talked about. We had a lot of it was great because the goal of our presentation, goal of any time we present is basically to just start a conversation, right? Because that's ultimately what we're trying to do is like let's start a conversation about cybersecurity in the face of what we call here at Vectra is what we call hybrid attacks, and we largely base those conversations on this premise, right? As enterprises, at Vectra we often say the enterprise will be hybrid forever, right? And enterprises are by largely hybrid are largely hybrid. Thus, let's make the simple conclusion that then all attacks are hybrid attacks, right? We could also add to this that we have discussions internally around um, all hybrid attacks are identity-based attacks. If you haven't seen the podcast we did on threat briefing on Scattered Spider, that's an example of a of a identity-based attack that just happens to be a hybrid attack. So we kind of live on this premise that the enterprise is hybrid, therefore attacks are also hybrid. And in this, we've done some research and we had an hypothesis that we went out and tested with, I don't think it was 2,000 SOC analysts around the world. And our hypothesis was it's relatively simple. In the modern, you can see it on screen, on the modern hybrid enterprise, hybrid attackers are rendering traditional approaches to threat detection response inefficient and ineffective. And we wanted to test this theory with defenders, the people actually detecting, investigating, and responding to attacks on an everyday basis. So we went out and asked them a series of questions on this. And before that, we kind of rooted the notion on defining what is a hybrid attack. We often talk about they're like finding the needle in a stack of needles. Um, Hybrid attacks are, they can start with anyone or anything, move anywhere at any time at speed to disrupt business operations at scale. And they can do this despite having every possible preventative measure in place. Now, we would contend and empathize with the SOC that defending against these things is extremely difficult, given the speed at which they move, given the size and scope of the attack surface and how it's expanding and ever changing. But fundamentally, we tried to break these attacks down, and these sort of the hybrid attackers, or what we call hybrid attacks, they do four things extremely well in terms of like what we see across the examples of these sorts of attacks. They typically compromise some sort of identity, right? And then they learn how to elevate privileges, take over a privileged account, an admin, whatever it might be, in order to hide and move laterally across domains from network into cloud, into SaaS applications, et cetera, largely unseen, ultimately finding where the crown jewels exist. And then that's when all hell breaks loose, exfiltration, et cetera, et cetera. So defending against these things is extremely difficult. And we would contend that, in order for an organization to be resilient to this sort of attack, And we talk, I don't know if you're familiar with Dunning-Kruger, but effect, but we kind of use this as a model for this. In terms of building resilience to these sorts of attacks, fundamentally, it comes down to the SOC's level of confidence and competence, finding that needle and finding it sooner rather than later in that attack progression. So framing resilience to these sorts of things around confidence and competence. How confident are you that you can find the attack, and competent that you can find it soon, investigate and respond to it as soon as possible? We root it in SOC fundamentals, like fundamentally, like for years, what have we been saying? You need visibility and control, right? Fundamentally, you need visibility and control. Can we see it? Can we stop it? But we'd also argue that the third component of this, given the nature of these sorts of attacks, we would also beg the question: how fast or how soon can we see it and stop it? Can we keep pace with this type of attack? Can we find the needle? Right. So we call it at Vectra, we frame it up as our 3 C's. You got to have coverage, you got to have clarity, and you have to have control. Fundamentally answering these 3 questions: can we see it? Can we stop it? How fast can we see it and stop it? How fast can we keep pace? And we look at this across, this is like 7 fundamentals of a SOC. Use this. This is something that Gartner had and has in one of their papers around the journey to SOC, rooted in these 7 SOC fundamentals in terms of finding the needle. Now, we sit down with many, obviously, security practitioners and leaders, and when we talk about the nature of a hybrid attack or different types of attack, you guys have a great deal of confidence, and rightfully so. You've invested wisely in technology. We often hear we're good, we have EDR, we have MFA in place, you're doing all the right things. We have Microsoft E5, we can do it in our SIM, we can do this in-house with the talent we have, we're not at risk. The list goes on and on. You're very confident, and rightfully so, because you've invested, you're smart, you're talented people, you've invested in the right things. And tools and the technology that we buy, the processes that we put in place, the people we have make us feel confident. But when we sat down and we surveyed these SOC analysts, the people in the trenches, and mapped it and asked them questions about the fundamentals, right? Again, can we see it? Can we stop it? How fast can we see it? Stop it? We learned that they're not that confident. For example, 71% of those we surveyed think they're already compromised. They just don't know it yet. So they have a high degree of 70% confident that they're already in. We just haven't been able to detect it yet or see that the attacker is already in our environment. 90% agree they can't keep pace with the number of alerts that are coming in on a daily basis. I think our research indicated it was on average 4,400 alerts per day across these 2,000 enterprises. 83% of the alerts they manually review in a typical workday are false positives, meaning they weren't necessarily malicious in nature, worth their investigation time, et cetera, et cetera. This one was surprising, yet also shocking and somewhat discouraging. Nearly all of them, 97%, fear they're going to miss a real attack that's buried in alerts. I think it was 49% of that 97% fear that every day. Go into work every day with an element of fear that they're going to miss something buried in the alert volume that's coming in. IBM also has done studies on this, and SANS and other sources, and this was an interesting one in terms of they spend 2.5 hours a day investigating threats that end up not being real. It's 2.5 hours of talent, of intelligence, of smarts, of people's time and talent being spent on digging into to things that end up not being worth their time, so to speak. 67, 2/3, according to IBM, say despite all the advancements in technology and process and people skills, our mean time to, you name it, has not improved. in the last 2 years. It's gotten, and nearly half say it's even worse than it was 2 years ago. And then lastly, in terms of like growing and evolving and improving those processes and technology, it's very difficult to measure and quantify value. What value are we delivering to the business? What value is this tool delivering to our SOC team? 56% say no idea how to measure that. So we're not even going to try. So despite how confident we might be at a SOC leader level, it's lacking. There's a big difference between what the leader believes and what the analyst is actually experiencing. Interestingly enough, Enterprise Strategy Group came out with a report on SOC market trends just this past October, and they found that 2/3 of security leaders that experienced an incident believe it could have been stopped if their team was more capable. So in terms of that diminishing confidence from A to B, leaders typically blame the level of competence of the team. At Vectra, we blame hybrid attacks for that diminishing confidence and competence. Going back to that definition, they can move anywhere at any time at speed, right? They could start with anyone or anything. You could disrupt the business operations at scale, despite having all of the preventative measures in place. The alert volume, all of these things come. We fundamentally blame the hybrid attack for this diminishing confidence and competence. Now, what do we do? Like, how do we get from B to C, right? How do we get from the low degree of confidence and competence to highly competent, highly confident that we could defend against these hybrid attacks? And I believe it's rooted in talent, right? So again, we partner with Gartner and learned, and they had some research that found like where are investments being made in security, and roughly 33% of investments go to tools and technology. Roughly 37% more than investment on the tech is investment in the people and the talent that are brought in house to defend against cyber attacks. So we would argue invest in talent, competence, and confidence. Invest, seek to glean as much value from where the largest amount of your dollars are being spent, and that's on talent. So moving from B to C requires us to look at how do we maximize the value of that spend, right? Of that investment that you have in people. Now, if we contend that defending against these things are hard and difficult to do, defending against hybrid attacks, it's like, okay, what makes them so hard to defend against? Going again back to our hypothesis that traditional threat detection response approaches are inefficient and ineffective. We've seen what the defender is going through in terms of like fear that they're going to miss something, buried in alerts, they can't keep pace with alerts, et cetera, et cetera. Why is it so hard? Why is it so difficult to defend against these things? And the first, and we boiled it down to three things. I'm a three things person. I could try to keep things simple by honing in on what are the three areas or the three things we need to focus on. What are the three reasons why something is happening or exists or whatnot? And in terms of hybrid attack defense, we boiled it down to three, exposure being the one. Getting coverage, detection coverage, visibility, et cetera, across a super complex, evolving attack surface is really hard to do. It's really hard to get real-time coverage across this hybrid attack surface in terms of like reliable visibility and coverage. That's super complex to do. So exposure is one. Latency is the other. Now, latency is a human being able to correlate individual detection streams, triaging them, writing rules, et cetera, And to get at an accurate signal is highly manual, and it's really hard to do. It's ever changing, it's ever evolving. And that creates a lot of latency in detection engineering, a lot of latency, and thus the ability to detect an attack in real time, the ability to like ever change your ways of delivering rich signal to the SOC. No wonder the SOC ends up with the third reason, and that's noise. They get a lot of alerts on a daily basis, and if you're getting 4,000 alerts a day, and you're looking, no wonder they 97% fear they're going to miss something, hitting in alerts. You get so many a day. Gaining control of these attacks that are hidden in that mess is close to impossible. Close to impossible for a human being to do. Now, there's a lot of vendors, solution technologies that focus on reducing alert noise. 80% reduction in alert noise, 75% reduction in alert noise. If you're getting 4,000 alerts a day and you reduce them by 75, 80%, you're still getting 1,000 alerts a day. Right. So I don't know if alert noise reduction is the right approach to the problem. I think the right approach to the problem is what we call signal. Right? It isn't about reducing alert noise. It's about increasing the fidelity, accuracy of the signal that the detection engineering team is delivering to the SOC analyst. And we believe AI is the only path to do that. We believe harnessing AI to find those needles hidden in a stack of needles inevitably builds talent's confidence and competence to be resilient to a hybrid attack. AI is what takes you from B to C. It's what reduces that exposure and latency, delivers the richer signal. How does it do that? Pre-built AI-driven detections, behavior-based detections across domain that understands what attackers are doing in each domain and looks for those sorts of behaviors. Then, in terms of, and that will reduce your overall exposure, right? Removing latency is about using AI to automate those manual processes that the detection engineer has to go through. Creating rules, right? Identifying new threats, creating the rule, building triage filters, correlating data and analyzing it in order to deliver, in solving a different use cases in order to deliver a message, a signal, an alert, a whatever to the SOC analyst. Using AI to remove as much latency as possible in that process will inevitably improve talent, confidence, and competence in responding to those attacks sooner rather than later. Interestingly enough, if you flip it onto the other side, the attacker side, they're using AI. And I would argue, what are they using AI for? They're using AI largely to remove latency in their processes, improve the accuracy of their phishing attacks, improve the accuracy and speed and scale of things that they do. So if the attackers are using AI to remove latency in their processes, why wouldn't a security team use AI to remove latency in their processes? If you do that, reduce exposure, remove latency, inevitably you're going to maximize the value of your talent because you're going to shift from thinking detection events. I'm going to detect as many events. I'm going to detect threat events and begin to analyze and investigate which ones are real or not real, shifting from that thinking to an entity-centric prioritized signal, right? Shifting from a detection mindset to a signal mindset will actually removes alert noise, actually increases fidelity, that increased signal reduces workload and actually maximizes the value of the talent you already have in place. How we do that, this is our approach, and we've talked about our approach. If you're familiar with what we call attack signal intelligence, coverage, clarity, control. Look at what data you're collecting across these attack surfaces. What are you detecting? normalize it, bounce it off of MITRE and other detection attacker techniques and maps, validate it to determine that it's relevant to security. Right? Is this something that's relevant to security? And you can use ML models and things to do that, to understand, okay, is this security relevant? Bounce that behaviors, those correlated behaviors off of an attack type, like use industry standard profiles of attackers to say, okay, this is meeting this profile of an attack. Doing this, using AI to do this in ML, you arrive at an attack rating. We're fundamentally trying to answer the question for the SOC analyst, is this real? How likely is this malicious? Is it a real attack that is happening in our environment? When you combine that with how important is the entity to our organization, whether it's a host or an account, how critical is that entity, domain server, user, whomever it might be. You answer the question, should I care? You take a combination of attack rating and entity importance. Is it real? Answering the questions, is it real and do I care? Fundamental questions that a SOC analyst has. You arrive at an urgency score. The higher the urgency score, the more critical it is and urgent it is. The clearer you're answering the third question, a SOC analyst, is this worth my time and talent? So instead of spending 2.5 hours investigating something that ends up not being real, they're spending less than an hour digging into an entity that has been given a high urgency score. They're spending their time and talent on that. And then that's where the talent maximization comes in. Kind of the third thing is like, what action do I take? As a human being, what action do I take? I'm digging into this entity that's under attack. I'm looking at all the correlated detections that AI has given me, that attack signal intelligence is given me. And I'm now to the point of like, how, when, and where do I stop it? And that's the control, putting that control in the SOC analyst's hands. So, our approach around coverage, clarity, and control, and how we map that to the 3 reasons why we think hybrid attack defense is so hard: exposure, latency, and noise. Flip that, reduce exposure, remove latency, maximize talent by giving them signal, not giving them detections, give them signal, and you'll maximize the value of that talent. Give you an example. We bounced this methodology off of a subset of customers and kind of took an average. Here's a relatively small security team, maybe even a mid-sized security team. They have 5 full-time security people. I think 2 are detection engineers, 3 are analysts. Let's assume they work an 8-hour day. Now we know that most security people work probably much more than that, 12, 14, 16 hours a day, nights and weekends. For the sake of this analysis, we were like, okay, let's just baseline it at 8 hours a day. And they have deployed or employed largely a SIM-based workflow, right? So across these 5 employees, the fully burdened investment in these 5 employees is roughly $812,000 a year. PTO, benefits, salary, fully burdened, $812,000. That's what the organization is investing in these people. We looked at specifically how they're spending their time relative to alert maintenance and management, from the identification of a threat to the creation of an alert to monitoring and triaging those alerts to investigating and responding to them. Roughly 6,200 hours a year. Now, if you break that $812,000 down by how much they make per hour, how much we're investing in them per hour, it's over $500,000 a year. So $500,000 of the 812,000 is spent on alerts. Now, we already talked about we get too many alerts. They're not real. 83% they're false positives. 2.5 hours spent investigating ones that aren't real. I'm scared I'm going to miss a real attack that's hidden in these things. $500,000 on that. Where specifically? Because they're manually doing these things. The $500,000 of value, of talent value, is stuck in alert maintenance and management, manually writing new rules, tuning them, monitoring and triaging them, assessing and prioritizing whether they're real, etc. So 6,200 hours, $500,000 being spent on this. When you apply, and I go back to defending against these hybrid attacks is hard. They move super fast. They're using AI to remove their latency, improve their speed and scale. Why aren't we doing the same? So take the same companies, five full-time security, the same investment. Now they're spending $2,200 on alerts, 2,200 hours on alerts in a given year. Total talent cost of roughly 178,000. Applying AI, value of signal, applying AI to your processes, your people, your technology, actually freed up $333,000 worth of talent value, roughly 4,000 hours. That equates to 2 full-time employees. Begging the question, like, what would you do with 2 full-time employees? Not go and hire 2 new full-time employees, not replace existing the talent you have in-house. If AI could do the work of the equivalent of 2 of those people, 2 of the 5 in this example, what else would they be working on? Would they be taking on higher value initiatives? Would they be taking on things that you've set aside because you don't have the time and resources? So taking the manual alert maintenance and management out of the hands of humans, putting it in the hands of AI actually builds talent, confidence, and competence. And that's obviously the goal of AI. And this kind of sums up, because our goal is B2C. It isn't about crushing confidence, A to B. It's about building confidence and competence with AI. That's B2C. And this quote from our customer, one of our customers says it all. This the CISO at a healthcare biotech company. Um, what's the value of AI in your application of defense against hybrid attacks? What's the value of AI? And this is why we do what we do. We take ambiguity out of the engineer and analyst's day. Why? So they can focus on what matters. They can focus on delivering the optimum value of their talent back to the security organization, back to the greater organization at large. Focus on things that really truly matter. And that is one part of their job, is obviously defending against hybrid attacks, but also opening up a whole chest of value that they could deliver in other areas: threat hunting, business relationships, mentoring, onboarding and training new people, whatever, building their own skills and expertise in cloud or identity or wherever it might be. So take that ambiguity. AI can take that ambiguity out of their day. They can focus on what matters. And ultimately, that's what we're all trying to do. So that's the deck. That's the story that we told at Cybersecurity Summit over the course of the last few months. Why we tell this story, and I go back to the beginning of this podcast. At the end of the day, I just want to start conversations. We start new conversations, have different conversations with cyber leaders and practitioners, and figure out how we think, to quote Adam Grant, think more upstream. Think again about how we're approaching these problems, because fundamentally, I think we can come up with a better way of tackling this problem together. That's my rant this episode. Join us again next week. We'll have another episode out. We've got a bunch of cool podcasts in the works. Hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks again, everybody.